I'd like to welcome you today. Thank you so much for joining us for our very first LUPC and SUPC webinar. My name is Marion Hutchins and I'm Head of Marketing and Communications for SUPC and the wider SUMS group. And it's really great to have so many people joining us online. As I'm sure many of you will know, our in-person LUPC and SUPC conference was scheduled to take place on the 30th of April in London. That would have been our 5th conference together, but of course, due to these unprecedented circumstances, we weren't able to deliver the conference in the usual way. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't lose all of that great content that we know that members are interested in, and bring that forward as appropriate. So thus today's session, which is part of some of the conference programming that we had planned. We will have some programming taking place as well on the 30th, and I'll give you a bit more information about that later. But great to have you here again. I'd like to thank in particular VWV, a legal firm on one of our frameworks, for their kind and generous sponsorship of today's programming, along with their expertise via speakers at this morning's sessions. So those that joined us this morning will know that we had a panel of VWV experts talking about procurement policy notices, force majeure and frustration, contract management, and then we had a really helpful Q&A session where we answered questions, VWV answered questions pertaining to specific agreements and what people have in place and how they might consider working and going forward in the current context. So thank you again to them. And this afternoon's programming really speaks to the heart of how we as individuals respond to the challenges thrown up by COVID-19. And not just how we respond as individuals, but how we respond as part of a team, part of a department, and part of a wider university or other public sector body. We have 2 of our SUMS colleagues with us this afternoon. So we have SUMS Principal Consultant Fola Ikpehai, who will be leading a session on change management. There's Fola there. And she'll be joined by SUMS Associate Consultant Felicity Gasparo and 2 colleagues for part of the Q&A session from this webinar. But Felicity will also be leading a session this afternoon, kicking off at 3:30, and that's going to be on personal resourcefulness and resilience in this difficult time. So stay tuned for all of today's sessions. We'll have a bit of a break in between the 2. So this session will go until 3. We'll then have a half-an-hour break for those that need to check a few emails, get another cup of coffee, recaffeinate, and then we'll be back here to start promptly at 15:30. I just remind you that you'll have a separate joining link for the last webinar of the day. So please refer to your joining instructions for that. So with that, I'll hand over to Fola, who's going to take you through some of the mechanics of how to use Zoom and how today's session will go. Over to you, Fola.
Okay, thank you, Marion. Hi, everyone. You're welcome to this session. So as Marion said, I'm Fola Ikpehai, and I am going to be taking you through the principles of successful change management and all of the lessons that we can learn from the current COVID-19 crisis, which we'll see how that plays out in the real world. As Marion said, at the back, just behind the scenes, you have Felicity, who will be answering your questions as they come in, and Grace, who will be helping me to turn the slides over, just to turn the pages over, so that I can focus specifically on you this afternoon. So Grace, if you wouldn't mind just changing the first slide. So there are 4 areas that we're going to cover today. And as Marion said, and as you've seen in the chat already from Suzanne, I am going to be asking you to get as much engagement as possible. So I don't want you just listening to me for 40 minutes. I will be posing a few questions. And at the bottom of your screen, you should have 2 functions. You will have the chat function and you have the Q&A function. So if you have any questions for me and for the panel, please put them in the Q&A function. But if it's anything to do with any questions or anything that fits into the narrative of what I am going through, or any areas where I ask for your feedback, please put this into the chat. If we see any questions kind of popping themselves into the chat, we will ask you to kindly move them over to the Q&A. So this first session, where we go through these 4 key points, is going to be the first 40 minutes or so of this session, and then we'll spend the last 20 minutes on questions, which my colleague Felicity will facilitate for us. So I hope that's all okay, and you're welcome to this session. So first of all, let's go to, next slide please, Grace. Let's go to change basics. So when we talk about change in our organizations, we are all at the moment, if I can start by saying, we are all change managers in some shape or form. Okay, so I've looked at the attendee list and I've kind of seen lots of you coming in, and I know you're all involved in procurement, commissioning and so on. But for the current state of play, where we are in now, we are all change managers, either at a macro level with our organizations or at a micro level. So looking at these 9 areas, there are 9 areas of this slide that kind of tell you the areas that can be impacted by any change. So think beyond COVID-19, any kind of change comes in. And I'd like to see in the chat, just before we go in, I'd like to see in the chat, what are the 2 areas that you think are most impacted by change currently? So I've got on the slide at the moment, I've got relationship with stakeholders, work patterns, culture, business processes, roles and responsibilities, organizational structures, IT systems and supply chain, and so on. What areas do you think have been most impacted by your organization in the last few weeks? Anything on the chat? Team dynamics, okay, work location, yeah, definitely. That's that. IT systems, oh yes, I was waiting for that one. IT systems, oh, lots of IT systems and work patterns. Decision making, financial stability, an interesting one coming in. Remote working tools and practice, yeah. Vendor relationships, that's a good one, because of course the way you've been communicating, I guess, with your vendors would have been impacted quite a lot. Definitely stakeholders for me, yeah, struggling in engaging with stakeholders. So brilliant, a lot coming in there, a lot coming in. Very much focused around, you've talked about culture there as well, but very much focused around our work patterns, our relationships, conflicting information, communication has come in a bit as well. So all of that is impacted, and that happens with any kind of change program. But because this is all conflated and really intense, it seems as if everything is coming in all at once. So yeah, a lot going on there, and a lot of these areas that are impacted by the current change. Grace, next slide, please. So on this very busy slide here, and you can also see it in the background here, my focus is on business transformation and change management. And as you will know, those of you within your organizations who have worked with change managers, we love our plans, okay? Change managers love our communication plans, our business readiness check plans, our change impact assessments. Everything in the real world is really, really important. So what I've put here is essentially change on a page. It doesn't matter what you call it. Different organizations will have different program management tools and techniques in place. But essentially, this is where you expect to be when you implement or put in place any change program. But now let's go to the next slide, please, Grace. Okay. Now, I'm hoping that everybody is laughing out loud here, because what this slide says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I understand that that was Mike Tyson said that in his heyday. I think he's been punched in the mouth a few times since then, but hey. So here we are. A click, please, Grace. So it is not Tyson, it is COVID-19. So the world in general, organizations, us as individuals, we've all been, you know, punched in the mouth by COVID-19. And essentially our plans for change managers, for team leaders, for strategic leaders, all of those plans have just gone out the window. Great slide, brilliant. Thank you very much for that feedback. You can use it next time in your sessions. So, let's go to the next slide, please, Grace. So let's talk then about what we're going through now versus what normally happens. So if I can have the first 2 clicks, brilliant. So at the top of this slide that you can see at the moment, it says normal change versus the current change that we are going through. Okay, so this is a little excerpt from the change on a page slide that I showed you earlier. So normally what you would have for any kind of change program, a vision-led change program, you would have leadership saying, we are not satisfied with our current state, the current state there in red. We want to change. A program would be put in place, and you would have a vision and you would have a target state, something that you're all focusing towards, okay? Very structured, very planned, very vision-led. Now, the next click, please, Grace. Now, what do we have? We have, or we had, I should say, a business as usual. That's BC in my diagram down there. I mean, it might have been, as this diagram, it might have been a grey business as usual. We might have been fed up. We might have been thinking even of implementing a change program to change some of our business as usual. But in a sense, it was what we were doing. We were satisfied with it. And then, click please, Grace. Where are we now? We're in the crisis zone. Excuse me. We're in the crisis zone where COVID-19, this red marker has come in and business as usual has gone out the window. I'm pretty sure that that is the same for everyone. Anyone who is doing business as usual now, I'd love to see that in the chat, and we'll all come to you and find out exactly how that's working. But essentially, we were in business as usual. We're now in what I'm calling the CZ zone, the critical or crisis zone. And after this, we are going to get to a new normal. Now, anyone who feels that the new normal is going to be the same as business as usual before COVID-19, I think we'll be very surprised, because the new normal after COVID, as I've called it on this slide, is likely to be extremely different. A new normal, a new business as usual is going to follow. So I just wanted to kind of get you a sense of where we are, where we were in terms of business as usual, and where we are now in terms of the crisis zone. If I can have the next slide, please, Grace. So there are lots of things then in terms of where we are now. And I think many people mentioned this on the slide earlier: communications, different working environments, vendor relationships, and so on. That came up. But clearly, as a result of the stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives policy that we all know and love and can recite in our sleep, I'm sure, we are now working in different places. We're working from home. If I can have the clicks, the text, please, Grace. So what's happening? Lots of things are happening to help us to work from home. This is all a change. This is part of a change. So we have tools to make it work, to keep connected, to communicate and engage. Okay, the sheep aren't social distancing, I've heard. Yeah, the sheep are all packed together, but the sheepdog, he's kept his social distancing. Yes, so we've got all of these tools. Before, I used to tell my change managers, I would say, you know, when you're focusing on change, you focus on the people, you focus on the process, you focus on the culture, and technology is, you know, it comes in at the end. Well, I think we've all, like I said, plans have gone out the window. Technology is at the forefront of everything now. So it's led by technology, but it still needs the kind of people side and process side of things as well. So support to ensure well-being in these times is really important. And for those of you who are team leaders or managers, you will be aware that in terms of ensuring well-being, you're not just ensuring the well-being of yourselves, but of your teams. So everything to do with collaboration and communication and engagement is heightened. If you were doing it, you know, at a lower level before, everything has kind of just had to go over the top because of our new work patterns and our new ways of working. Next slide, please, Grace. So what I'd like to see now, like I said, that is the first point, different change patterns. And I'd just like to see in the chat any words that you can use or that you have heard used to describe how people are feeling at the moment, working in these new ways in response to COVID-19. Any kind of scared, yeah. Surreal, oh, I love that word. Isolating, anxious, some lonely. Friends that are, okay, engaged, they're all disorientated, yes. Overwhelmed, unsure, depressed, okay. Parallel world, closed in. Lots going on here, lots going on. I'm just going to scroll up a little bit because I saw one that I loved, and oh, energized, that's the one, yes. So there's lots going on here. So lonely, uncertain, disorientated is coming in, but there's also that energy, that creativity. And that's one thing that I also wanted to get out of this, and we'll go into that a little bit more later on in these slides. But a lot going on. We are feeling, I said to somebody recently, I said, I feel as though I went to sleep in the real world and I woke up in a sci-fi movie. It really just feels like that sometimes, that this is totally different in our lifetimes. I'm not sure we've ever experienced anything like this. But I can also see some really great statements here. Empowered to do things differently. I think that is one thing, once again, that is going to come up on what we're going to be talking about. Reflection, reflective, yes, kind of pondering, thinking about more time. Okay, I'm assuming that means more time to do different things. And I'm assuming, hopefully, be creative. So yeah, lots of words, and essentially the words I expected to come up here. A little bit about the, oh, a little bit scared, a little bit uncertain, but also thinking to the future, inspired to do things more differently, possibly being more productive. And one that I have actually thought of myself, less travel time, more time. I wonder how that's going to be when we all go back to work and the trains are all late the first day back. Let's not think about that yet. But clearly, there are lots of words that can describe how we're feeling. And one thing that's just come up is learning new IT skills very fast. That has had to happen. In fact, at this point, I think I'll go on to the next slide, because that is what some of the things people have said that I've spoken to. So first, okay, brilliant. So this particular comment speaks to something that you have just said there about learning new IT skills very fast. We've had months worth of change within a few weeks. It's a comment that I heard a few weeks ago when I was speaking to some of the change managers within the sector. And it is true. Before, we would have probably planned for 6 months. We would have a lovely, glossy digital strategy, and we'd put all these things in place. And now we've had to put this online webinar in place in a few days. Thanks, Grace and Marion. Everything is changing. We've learned that you can't keep to old ways of working using new technology. And how many of you, just those two statements that I've put there, I just want a yes or a no. Do these chime with you in your organizations? Does this relate? Can you relate to these two statements? Yes, yep, definitely. So learning old ways of working, that's an interesting one. Yes, completely. That second point there, we've learned that we can't just fit the old ways into new technology. The person who mentioned that at the session that I convened a few weeks ago was talking about translating their physical diary. So a physical diary where I think they had back-to-back meetings, and they said, okay, yeah, we're on lockdown. I'm going to continue. I'm going to have my back-to-back meetings. So they translated all of their meetings into, well, Microsoft Teams as it was. And they found out that it was really tiring having back-to-back, virtual meetings. So they had to rethink. I think somebody has already said here about, changing the way we do things. They had to reflect and think, okay, do I really need all these meetings? In a physical environment, you would have got up, taken your books, gone to a new room, probably walked across campus, or done something in between those meetings. But having 7 hours of back-to-back meetings, obviously not appropriate for the way we're working at the moment. The next speech bubble, please, Grace. This point actually speaks to the last point as well. No protocols in place at the moment for new ways of working. So people are saying, we are just experimenting, we're finding out what works. And we're just focusing on that at the moment, just seeing what works, and we'll pull that together in the end. And the final speech bubble on this page. Okay, what happens when the novelty wears off? That was a comment that came from one of my change leads, and it is very true. Actually, I should have said earlier on when I was looking at what's in the crisis zone. The crisis zone is not just going to be uniform throughout. There is a point where in fact, the novelty I think has worn off for quite a few people already, let's put it that way. But there will come a point when we will have to re-energize, depending on how long this lockdown is going to last. We have to inject new energy into it as the novelty wears off, and we have to keep that momentum going. I'm pretty sure as well that some of you will relate to that last statement. What happens when, or you might want to tell me if the novelty has already worn off for you. Next slide, please, Grace. Okay, so another piece of learning then from this crisis zone that we're in at the moment. This is interesting because when you go through crises, yeah, somebody said the novelty has definitely worn off. When you go through crises, this is where you always have those, profound calls to action. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. We can all recite that. And there's lots going on in terms of breaking down boundaries. We've got government, industry, higher education, individuals all working together, sewing scrubs in their sheds. We've got Formula One working with universities on breathing equipment. Everything has broken down. Okay, so here in the crisis zone, we're all using our skills totally differently. We're all trying to make a difference. And this is interesting because we try and get this when it comes to real change, but it hardly ever happens. This is one thing that we need to learn from the current state of play. How do we break down those barriers? How do we create that sense of urgency when we don't have a virus knocking us all down? So it is really important. And another thing I wanted to emphasize here in the crisis zone, actually, and I'll just kind of go off on a tangent here and I'll see what people say in the chat. But managing our environment is really important. I don't know about like I said at the beginning, we're all change managers here. And we're change managers because we're either managing change around us or we're managing change within our teams or supporting our strategic leaders in terms of the wider organization. But there's one thing that I had to change. Obviously, I'm a home worker. I work remotely. I work in the office. And normally when I work at home, I can't work in silence. So I always had, the news on in the background. In pre-COVID-19, I would always have BBC News on in the background. I've realized I had to change my immediate environment because having the news on was actually depressing. So it was actually starting to affect my work. So what I had to do now, I don't watch the news until later in the evening. I don't have it on during the day because I was trying to insulate my immediate environment so that I could work properly within this crisis mode. I don't know whether anyone has any examples that they'd like to share in the chat, similar to what I've just said for myself. It's about getting the right environment to work, the right environment to kind of protect your immediate environment. Somebody said, I've done this too. Exactly. So just in terms of crisis, yeah, we're using our skills differently. We're making a difference. Boundaries are being broken down. And essentially, it is about now focusing on everyone uniting. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide has come up quite slowly, but leadership, you should all be seeing my leadership slide at the moment. It's interesting, leadership. I have a statement I'm going to make here, and I don't know whether you'll all agree with me, but perfect decision-making, which is part of leadership, perfect decision-making in a crisis is practically impossible. True or false? Let's see whether anyone believes or agrees with that statement I've just made. Perfect decision-making in a crisis is totally not possible. Exactly. Thank you for that. It is true. So we're looking for perfect decision making. Everyone wants this leadership, and not to politicize things here, but oh, why didn't they do this then, and why didn't they do this? Everything you have to work, you have to kind of work on your judgment, your gut feel, you're taking, really strategic risks. But perfect decision making is practically impossible to do. One thing, however, that leaders have to get right during this process, and we've given the fact that, your decisions are going to change as things evolve. But one thing that is really important is the third bullet point down here, regular communication. I think somebody said earlier on, when I asked what words describe or, how have things changed? Somebody said, messages, conflicting messages, I think was the statement that they made at the time. We need that regular communication. We need consistent and timely messaging based on what's happening. It's really important. Leaders, if you are leaders, or if you are managers, or if you have a team, we need to communicate. And it's more important now than it ever was. I know I've been to some virtual sessions, and we're all doing a lot. All of our leaders at the moment are doing, either webinars like this or question and answer sessions. And somebody said in a session that I was in a few weeks ago, I wish we could continue this when things return to normal. There are some things that we're learning now about what our leaders can do in terms of that communication that we really, really want to keep. That last point that I want to focus on here, not to be overpromised, that has come up quite a lot. And it's where, obviously, in the wider world, the government, in terms of breathing equipment and protective gear and so on, that phrase will ring a bell. But within our organizations, I don't know how we are managing in terms of making sure that we don't overpromise, and that we are delivering, and that we are supporting, and that we are kind of working in that environment where we recognize that this is not business as usual. I just want to read something here. We need to consider that we are all just human beings and experiencing this for the first time at the same time. I think there is a lot of pressure for us to continue to deliver as normal, and that isn't possible right now. We are all doing our best. Thank you very much for that statement. You've done this presentation for me, because that is exactly what I wanted to get at. The norm has gone out the window. And in terms of business as usual, once again, that we need to recognize, and as leaders especially, we need to recognize that business as usual is not going to be happening right now. In fact, what we need to be doing is setting nice, clear, short-term goals, focusing on critical success factors, what really needs to be done to keep things going, and having almost our own vision statements. So we have the, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. How many institutions or universities or organizations have their own little statement to say, this is what we are focusing on during this time? We recognize that it's not business as usual. For us at SUMS, it's about supporting the higher education sector through this challenge that we're all going through. That is our focus. Everything else can fall by the wayside. We need to recognize, this person says, that we are all experiencing this at the same time, and there is a lot of pressure. Okay? So, and also in terms of reverting to business as usual, there will come a time when we need to think beyond the current crisis, about business recovery, about what we need to do when we get to that new normal. That is a point that we're going to make just after this slide, very, very shortly. So we've been focusing on the now, learning for the now. Okay? Next slide, please, Grace. Okay, so this last chat preempted me. Let's just go through all the steps. So learning for post-COVID-19, then business recovery, as this person has put it. Now, when organizations go through change, basically you go through several levels before you get to the optimum in the real world, okay? We get to that top step, culture change and reskilling. What I would say is we have actually rushed our way through the first two steps of this ladder, laying the foundation, full adoption. You know, I have to say we've laid a foundation, but it is not a deep, solid foundation. It is a foundation that is helping us through this crisis. What we will have to do post COVID-19, what I call the AC stage after COVID, is we need to look at how we take any good behaviors, any fantastic things that have emerged, any fantastic opportunities that we have developed during this crisis time, and start to embed new processes, new capabilities, embed them within the organization, so that we can kind of look back and say, yeah, that was challenging, but we have done something, and here is a product that we're using in the future. Culture change and reskilling is going to be important going forward. Let's not think that we're just going to go from that normal back to that normal. The normal after COVID-19 is going to be very different from the normal that we left behind. So we are going to be focusing on business recovery. We are going to be reverting to business as usual, but there is the potential for that business as usual to be much better than the gray business as usual in my diagram earlier that we left behind. So let's not focus on returning to normal. Let's focus on returning to normal +1 or +2 or multiples. So that's the point that I wanted to make here. There is an opportunity to reach beyond the old normal to the new normal and get up to those last two steps. Grace, the next slide, please. So here are a few other reflections from my change leads when I met with them a few weeks ago. I think that statement, I'd like some yays or nays, whether you agree with that. We don't know when or how the after COVID phase is going to work. If there are any questions, if you just put them into the question and answer phrase. But yes, we don't know when or how the AC phrase is going to work. We will look at that in a bit more detail. The next slide. Sorry, not the next slide, next point here. As change leads, we need to set the basis for sustainable change on the back of the current crisis. I am hoping that we all agree with that. So as team leaders, as managers, we need to set the basis for sustainable change. This goes back to the point I was just making. Let's think about the opportunities that this gives us to improve business as usual. Agree. Yes, definitely agree to that. Thank you very much. And there's just one last point I have on this slide, last speech bubble. This is an interesting one, because we were talking during this session, we were saying, you know, we're doing all these things virtually, we're saving the environment, you know, climate change and all that. Would we want to see this beyond COVID-19? And people said, well, virtual meetings will never fully replace physical meetings, but it will make us challenge things on a case-by-case basis. Agree, somebody says, excellent opportunity to digitize how we do things, e.g. online contract management systems investment. Brilliant. Somebody is already thinking beyond the current crisis. So this has given us options that we can pull from in the real world. We won't have the same urgency to stay at home, but we do have that where we can kind of use what we have gathered through this time into the real world. Okay, so if I can go to the next slide. Okay, so key points then to note for the future beyond COVID-19. Before I go to the text that's on this slide, I'd just like us to think for, well, it won't be a minute because a minute is a long time in the virtual world, but I'd just like us in the chat function, just say to me, are there any specific issues that you can think of that are going to emerge the day after lockdown has ended and we are all invited back to our work environments and so on? What do you think? Give me some thoughts about some of the issues that you think are going to come up. Anything? So we're beyond more online learning packages, revert to old ways. Yeah, reverting to old ways of working, people wanting to continue working remotely more often. Exactly. Worry can still get COVID. Exactly. All of the things that are coming up. More home working. Yep, I fear the floodgates will open with all the activities that haven't been able to be progressed during lockdown. I like that one. But yes, essentially, what is going to happen immediately after COVID-19 is going to be, people are going to be, how are we going to fit back into that new normal, into the new commute, into the old, which is then going to be the new commute? What kind of things are we going to see? Are we going to be still afraid of taking the underground, for those of us who live in London, for fear of catching COVID-19? You know, all of those things that are still going to come up. There is going to be that period between where we are now to where we are going to be, that period of uncertainty where we try and scrutinize things and get to this new normal. So what we are looking at here then, in terms of the future beyond COVID-19, is we need to go back to the basics. We need to think about those opportunities that are arising from these new ways of working. We need to get back to a sense of normality, but we need to keep on adopting those good behaviors that we have picked up during this period when we have had to. And we need to kind of, that third bullet point there is really important. The things that we are experimenting with at the moment, we need to get to a point where we are formalizing some practices and procedures and balancing things and working on a blended approach. Will people still see the same value of universities? That is an interesting point that people have come up. Will people still see the value of going to a physical location to get their lectures? There's lots going on here. There are lots of issues that are going to emerge, and we need to start thinking about those issues now, so that we can plan about how we need to deal with them in the future. Maintaining some sense of urgency is also really important, because that change relies on keeping that sense of urgency. We're rounding up very soon, but I just have a couple more slides. Grace, next slide, please. So here is just a summary of all of the things that we have already noted in terms of the fundamentals of change. The reason I put this slide here is to say to you that whether you're in a crisis or whether you're not in a crisis, all of these things will play out. Getting those clear messaging, creating a need, understanding why something is important, having the right tools, all of those things matter, whether we're in a crisis environment or in a non-crisis environment. So if nothing else, when you get this PowerPoint, after this session, focus on this slide when you are looking at your change for the new world after COVID-19. And my final slide. So here, what I would like us to do very quickly, we've all seen the change curve before, and we've all used it in various kind of team building sessions and so on. I'd like to see where we think we are on the change curves in terms of accepting what's going on, and so on and so forth. Now, before I see anything in the chat, I would like to, Grace, if you wouldn't mind giving me 2 clicks. Okay, so I have taken an executive decision to cancel out denial, because if anyone's in denial, well, let's not even go there. So nobody's in denial. This is happening, okay? But where are we? So we're in exploration, acceptance, crisis exploration, okay, yeah. So we're essentially getting to new confidence, brilliant. So we're getting to that point when we're happy with, and we've kind of, let our creative juices flow. So exploration to acceptance. So I think we are all getting to the right-hand side of this curve. In terms of if we are on the left-hand side, and here is where I'm just going to give a little bit of a plug to my dear Felicity, who's come into the webinar after this. Coaching is a really good way to get ourselves out of that slump and into that exploration and acceptance and new confidence. So let's focus on that webinar is coming up after this one. But yeah, there's a lot going on, coming out of crisis into exploration. Well done. Going from storming to norming. Acceptance so long as the end is in sight. I think that's a lovely point at which I'm going to end this, actually. Acceptance, as long as we know that the end is in sight. There is going to be an end to this. So that is what we need to be planning for. When that end comes, we need to be ready for it. Okay, so thank you, everyone. So everyone, I'm hoping that we're moving to the right hand side. And here now we're going to go into questions that Felicity has been kind of looking through. Hi, Felicity.
Hi, can you see me?
Yeah, we can all see you.
Okay, perfect. Hi everybody. So really interesting just watching all your comments as you came through. Not so many questions, but lots of comments and observations. The first one I wanted to ask you about, Fola, was whether you can give an example of what the new norm will be. So we're talking about the new norm as an entity, but what do we actually think that might look like?
So I think the new normal will be something of a blended approach. That came on the back of the issues that people were talking about when that last statement that I asked people to, give me some ideas of what's going to happen that first day back. And I think what we all need to do is think about all of there are some things that we have done during this lockdown that we never thought we could do, okay? And what we need to do is grab those, and at our very first team meeting, when we're all back in our physical location, let's have instead of having a business as usual team session when we're all back after COVID-19, let's have a, what did you learn during this process? What can we pick up? What can we take and build on during this process? So in terms of understanding exactly what that will look like for every organization, clearly I won't be able to give you that. But what I will say is that all of us now are going to be challenging why we have done something, why we need to travel, 100 miles up to Scotland, say, for a 1-hour meeting. Do we have to do that? Can we use, this kind of thing instead? So what the new normal is likely to be is very much a blended approach where we challenge what we are doing and we kind of get more value out of it. And so I think this is similar to the question that you've just posed, because one person said and when I asked about the issues was, will students still want to come to the university for lectures? And that is another thing that we need to be thinking of. People have got a taste of what things can be like when we are locked down. So we need to get those experiences out into the open. Felicity, I think you did a survey recently, didn't you? Putting you on the spot there. But, we need to understand exactly what students liked about the current state of play so that we can then build that in for the future. So I think in terms of what the new normal will look like, I have to put hand on heart and say, I do not know for each individual organization. But what I do know is that it will be more challenging about just going back to the status quo, as it were.
So some of the feedback from the students was really quite surprisingly positive about being able to do things remotely and have things recorded, and also having that one-to-one contact virtually with their lecturer, with their academic tutor was important. But I think somebody's just commented on the chat that they are also missing the social side. Yeah. So I think house party will go so far, but absolutely I think students are going to want to come back together. Certainly undergraduates. For postgrads, actually, it seemed to make a positive difference in that they didn't have to travel and they could be more focused on their learning. So we are actually doing some more extensive work, talking with university leaders and publishing an in-depth think piece on this. So look out for that. But that particular report is already up on the SUM's website. So just building on the new norm question, Fola, somebody's asked about whether there are any tips on things we can do to re-energize the team after a period of time away. And so again, pulling out from the chat, there were certainly lots of questions or observations about being concerned about being close with people, physically close after all of this, and you know, going from a period of social distancing into being in proximity. So any tips that you can do to think about how you actually bring a physical team back together?
Yes, so I've been thinking about this quite a bit actually, and I think what we have to do, this change was forced on us really fast, and we need to go out of it. And I don't know how this works for individual organizations, but I think we need to go out of it. We need to transition out of it. We shouldn't just go straight back. We need to kind of start. So first of all, for example, I would suggest we start having a little bit, if we weren't having working from home a couple of days before, we probably need to think about how we start to have, you know, what am I thinking about? Sorry?
Phase it in.
Yes, phase
Yeah,
it
so
in.
it's not just everybody
So
back
it's not just
at 5
everybody back all at the same time. So that's the way I would go. I would say let's phase it in, and even with our students, if it comes back to, let's start having that. And I think I've mentioned it earlier, that blended approach. But don't go. Let's put a plan in place, a plan that takes us through a transition phase. Let's not just all, you know, get back in on day one. That is not going to happen. And we need to. Another thing that we need to think about here is productivity is not going to go back to 100% on day one either. And our leaders, we need to kind of work with our leaders to work on that, to work on getting ourselves back up to 100%. I think somebody said here in the chat earlier about looking at business recovery. Business recovery is always phased. You don't go from zero to hero just like that. So that's the advice I would give.
Yeah, so somebody also commented that there's just going to be a lack of productivity to begin with, whilst people get to sort of share stories about how it's been for them and their experiences of this, and that leaders really and managers are just going to need to accept that things will be different for a period of time until people settle back into a different pattern. There was also a comment, just skipping one of the questions for a sec, there was also a comment about if there's an extended lockdown, how can we re-energise the team during lockdown? So quizzes and things. So I heard, for example, that just as a good example, I heard that a team were having Friday night drinks where they'd never made it work before because everybody was always rushing out of London. But this way, they were all able to sort of just sit back at 5 p.m. on a Friday and have drinks together, or a quiz night, or whatever it might be. But again, Fola, I'll leave that to you to answer.
No, quite right there. And I actually heard another point that similar to that, but a little bit different, where everybody kind of logged into, I think, well, one of the platforms anyway, where they could FaceTime each other. But instead of having a meeting FaceTime, they were essentially doing their work. So, you know, everybody was on screen as if they were in a virtual office, but just working away. So it wasn't a meeting for the sake of talking to each other, but just kind of get that presence. So, you know, everyone could see everyone else on screen.
So it sounds to me like as we're sort of moving through that learning curve, that change curve, that actually starting to think about what that plan looks like and building that. Certainly if you're a leader of a team, or building or responsible for key stakeholder relationships or vendor relationships, that will be absolutely pivotal in enabling a smooth return.
Yeah. So if there are leaders and managers out there, like I said, I think you need to, first of all, before you go back, don't when the lockdown is closed off and we're told we can all go back to work, I would urge us, don't go back, don't phase it in. So immediately that happens, say to everybody on chat, hooray, we can all go back. Now let's plan for this. And then let's plan it gradually. So give ourselves a week, maybe 2, to kind of really get back into it. Okay, so that's one thing I would urge. Have a going back to work plan, as it were.
So a couple of other questions and comments on the chat. One question I haven't got in front of me, but the essence of it was, now that we've proven that we can work from home, will the VC be more amenable to it? And then there was another really good observation, I thought, about trust, and actually we're facilitating, this is sort of facilitating a shift away from that sort of presenteeism, and actually that managers and leaders have to trust output as opposed to sort of that micromanagement.
Yes. Well, I can't speak for every single VC, but I would suggest that for all our organizations now, we will have to look at the current state of play and think about what has really worked and take that forwards. Coming back to, what was the second part of that question now, Felicity? Sorry?
Trust.
Yes, trust. There's something that I listened to recently. I can't remember what the acronym is now, but essentially it is about focusing on outcomes rather than, focusing on, you're here and you're here from 9 to 5. So it's very much a work ethic that is focused on looking at the outcomes rather than you're being presenteeism, as it were. So that is something that I am saying, when we go back, let the first team session that you have, don't let it be a business team session. Don't have an agenda that kind of sets out, what's going to happen 6 months down the line. Think about everything that has happened and what we can take from it. That is really important for that first time back, to be focused on that sense of reflection, hindsight, and what we can take from it. And that is something that you can present. Every VC, every chief exec, and we've all worked with quite a few chief execs, but every chief exec wants evidence of the benefits that can arise from change. So if we are going to say, this has worked, see what has happened, see all the outputs, see what we've got in terms of these, creative outcomes, that is evidence that you can put on the chief execs or the VC's table and say, let's adopt a different approach here. So it's all about providing that evidence.
There's also been some commentary about different things that people have done to really enhance their experience of working from home. So some people have talked about routine being really important, and actually just sticking to the normal work routine where possible has been good, but equally not sitting at the desk at the computer for 8 hours straight has been important. So those leg stretches, getting outside, getting some fresh air, and in the chat I can just see that somebody talks about doing an exercise class every morning and a mindfulness session once a week with her team, her or his team, sorry, apologies, I don't know to ensure their well-being, which again takes that holistic approach to the team, doesn't it, in terms of that team building and unity whilst you're distant from one another.
Yeah, definitely. Taking a walk around the block alone, obviously maintaining social distancing, going up to the corner shop to buy. But yes, just making sure that and you don't have to be sat in front of a computer or laptop either to FaceTime. You can take a walk with somebody with your phone, along the way. So rather than listening to music on your daily walk or your day, you can be talking to somebody. So just keeping that, we are social beings after all. So just keeping that communication going is really important. But I like some of the ideas that are coming up about bingo nights and quiz nights and exercise classes. And like we've said, we need to change it up. As the novelty dies down, we need to sense that. We need to sense check things on a regular basis. And that is why regular communication is really important, and honest communication as well. I mean, if a team leader comes into a Microsoft Teams meeting and says, "Hi, everyone, how are you doing?" And everyone says, "Oh, fine," then nothing's going to change. But if we're feeling, if somebody's feeling down, and if the leader says, I was feeling a little bit like this yesterday, let's think about how we can change things up and get some ideas out there.
So there's another question in the Q&As, Fola, about lots of benefits. We've sort of rattled off a number of benefits from the situation that we're in at the moment and what we potentially will plan to take back. But what are the disadvantages and negatives, and how can we therefore overcome them? So what's sort of left in the basement that we need to get out of what's happening at the moment, and how can we move forwards from those?
So I guess the disbenefits from this, and the benefits, the disbenefits are kind of just the other side of the coin from the benefits, really, because getting back, I mean, think about how you feel after you've gone on, and this is something you've planned, a really long holiday, 6-week holiday, and we're not in holiday at the moment, you know, we're in that limbo work situation, but think about that and think about your first day back. And you just think about, we were just talking about the change curve, weren't we? That first day back is going to, the disbenefit is some people, if they are not properly supported, will be in that depression and crisis. They will go into that after COVID-19 rather than now. So one thing that we have to do is that is the key disbenefit that I can think about. And that one thing that we have to do is that well-being and support immediately after is going to be critical to get us out of this.
Yeah, I agree.
And of course, those relationships, somebody I think at the very beginning talked about, I think relationships with stakeholders was one of the things that they said had been impacted by this change. Getting those relationships back, and I know we're coming up to the hour now, but getting those relationships back is going to be really critical. And if we don't do it right, if we don't plan it right, that is going to be a significant disbenefit from this current situation that we're in.
Absolutely. I also noticed that somebody commented that their relationships with their vendors had really improved because the vendors were really doing everything they could to make things work. So again, sort of taking things forwards. You know, I think it is being honest about the disadvantages, and then finding the tonic, if you like, to what those disadvantages are.
Yeah. Essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that we need to touch on? So essentially my final word to everyone before we hand back over to Marion is, you know, keep focused on the change fundamentals, get those simple messages in, support each other, plan for the future, plan for business recovery, plan for a new normal when we get back to, you know, the things as they should be. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Fola.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Fola and Felicity. That felt like a really energizing session and a bit of group therapy there. I feel like a lot of people got things off their chest. So thank you both very much for that.